Thank you both for joining us this afternoon. Guillaume, I'm going to start with you because I think your story is a particularly interesting one. Now, you started out originally as an engineer. You were studying. You dropped out of university. You had about $15,000, spent some time surfing, and then you went on to build one of the most successful fintech companies in the world. Now, these days, Checkout.com powers payments for organizations like Netflix, Uber, or Kareem and Talabat that we know in this part of the world. Now, what's been interesting is that you've built Checkout.com all over the world, and at a time when fintech regulation across Europe and the US in particular really is tightening. Now, tell me, you say that entrepreneurs have a responsibility to help governments drive economic transformation. So tell us a little bit about your journey and what that partnership looks like when it really works.
Yeah, absolutely. So starting first on the just Liz Truss comment that I heard before, I believe in net zero. I think that if you have a high EBITDA margin, as an entrepreneur, it's important to give back in a certain way. And I'm completely pursuing a net zero in my company because we're profitable, fast growing. And I think entrepreneurs have a role to play in society. And if you can give back through a net zero strategy, everyone should do a little part. So I have an opportunity here to say this. And then I think clearly you mentioned the word like regulations tightening. We are the result of regulations happening more than tightening. Historically, we came to life because the European Union deregulated the world of payments and gave the opportunity to entrepreneurs to go into, straight to Visa, MasterCard, disintermediate the banks, and become a pure player in e-commerce. This happened to us, happened to Revolut. It created a landscape of new fintechs who created value for consumers, created value for shareholders, created, I like to believe, value in the ecosystem at large because HSBC and Barclays ended up having competition and you end up creating just a better environment for the ecosystem at large, just not the fintechs themselves. The UAE, came a bit later in that journey, but they, I think agreed with this principle. We had the, retail payment services license here. We support the Tabis of the world, the Talabats, the Tap Send, a lot of people who help in money remittance. But fundamentally, our infrastructures help the economy. They create jobs. We have hundreds of jobs here, more obviously opening every year. And I think it's the role of an entrepreneur is to actually have an open dialogue with the regulator, ideally with the government where it's possible. Highlighting the UAE again, it's much easier to speak with the UAE, senior leaders than it is to speak with number 10. And just explain that a level playing field, competition is good for the economy and good for ultimately the people who use our services. So I recognize that I started in Europe, but now it's a global business because most countries are actually agreeing with this principle that competition is good for the landscape. And it was in the news just recently. We got a bank charter in the US who's also opening us new opportunities. And I think we're going to pursue this, licensing regimes that support our business and I think are just, good for us and our customers.
Very interesting. Sitoyo, let me bring in you here. Again, very much involved in digital tech, but a very different story. Now, M-PESA essentially allows people to be able to use their mobile phones as bank accounts. So people can send money, receive salaries, pay bills, and access government services. And it now underpins daily life for millions of people across Africa. I think you've got around 60 million users. But of course, when the business was first founded, mobile money really didn't exist. The regulation surrounding it just didn't exist as well. So tell me, from your perspective, what role did governments play in enabling M-PESA's growth? And how should governments work with innovators today if they want to stimulate that same type of creative innovation?
I think for us was when we started in 2007. So we are turning 19 in March. And when we engaged with government that time, the central bank, they're trying to solve financial inclusion growth. So at that time, financial inclusion was about 23%. So they had an agenda for it to reach 50% and above. And there were challenges in how money was being used, or challenges in bank accounts. That time, I think bank accounts were about 3 million bank accounts at that time. So when we proposed to them the start of M-PESA, they gave a letter of no objection. And from that day onwards till today, every single product and service that we launch, we take to the central bank. They know our strategy. They know my strategy up to 2030. From ideation to the time we roll out a product, the central banks are very much know what we're doing. And by that, it enables them to approve our products quicker. There are a lot of products and services that we launch today, like opening an account virtually, that still there's no regulation. So we've been given a letter of no objection. So we work very closely with the regulators to ensure that as long as we don't add systemic risk to our system and to the economy, because we're so big, like in Kenya, it's 70% of the GDP that is flowing through it. So we need to be very, very careful on how we add new products and services into it. But what we've learned with regulators is, as long as you're open to them, as fintechs, we always go to regulators when you want to launch. And the regulators and the national payment systems regulators, they're few. They're probably 10 or 15 people. Even in the UAE, I know some of them. It's a small team. But fintechs, we are hundreds of us. So we all go to the regulator for the same. So the best way to approach is actually engage the regulator very, very much early in your innovation journey.
And it's not always easy getting through that red tape, though, is it? But clearly you've got the central bank on speed dial. Let me put it to you both then. In terms of your experience, do you feel that governments can pick a winner? Can they pick a unicorn? Or is it more about, I guess, shaping the right environment, essentially getting out of the way and letting founders being able to act faster and really have that frictionless experience to be able to build and scale? What are your thoughts, Guillaume?
I don't think, they should never pick a winner. And without quoting any country here, what you see some regulators defend their incumbents. Because ultimately, banks have a role to play in society, and banks are being attacked, so to speak, by fintechs from all corners. Like, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Some people do payments like we do. Some people do the corporate bank, like treasury at scale for fintechs. Some people do the money remittance and the consumer side. And, the regulators sometimes will not protect, but they'll slow down the pace at which a fintech can go, because, like the gentleman mentioned, it takes time to get a license, and it's at the bon vouloir, it's the regulator who decide when you get your license, and sometimes you have a perfect application and it still take a few years. And I think it's what you see is, from our experience, all the fintechs are treated equally. Unless you have then problems on your AML and compliance, and then you're under review, and that's a completely separate topic, which never happened to us, by the way. Worth mentioning, we have perfect relationships with all our regulators. But if you are then, all your permissions are in order, you can do business, and things are mostly level playing field. What you do see is that you see sometimes the regulators slowing down your new permissions, the new licenses that you're asking, because quite often they're trying to protect the banks. And I think it's, from my perspective, common sense, it's almost fair.
But how do you fix that? If you are seeing a slow down, how do you speed that up?
Unfortunately, if in life it was only about putting a good application or doing well when you ask something, you would, life would be much easier. You have to underwrite that some regulators are faster and some of theirs are slower. I mentioned the bank charter in the US. Before the bank charter, I applied for an ILC, change of government. The ILC was no longer in. Square had an ILC, change of administration, the ILC were no longer possible. We spent millions of dollars discussing with the OCC for a fintech charter. That didn't happen either, because the small bank unions in the US shut down this initiative that was a federal initiative. And now we have a Georgia bank charter. And being an entrepreneur is never a straight line. You try your best, you underwrite the scenarios that you have in front of you, you try to put forward the best move that you can on your chess game if you want to, and then you hope for the best. But there's a lot of things you don't control, and regulatory approval is certainly one where all you can do is prepare the best application, show your experience. Clearly, it helps to be licensed at this point from the US to Canada to Japan, the UAE, UK, Banque de France, and when you go to a new regulator, like we just did in Brazil, because we had our license in Brazil, they will take into account that you have that experience. But I think there's no perfect path that guarantees you that application. In Brazil specifically, last year I went to meet Galipolo, the central bank governor, and it still took 9 months to get the application even be considered. Wow. So I think it's, and some people will get it in 3 months, some people will get it in 9 months. I think it's you focus on the things you can control.
And it's tricky, isn't it? Because I think when you're building a company like you are and you're scaling across markets, you're making a lot of very long-term, hard-to-reverse decisions, whether that is securing licenses, deploying capital, hiring thousands of employees as well. So it's not easy then when that regulation and policy changes slows down. But Sitoyo, let me go back to what I just asked Guillaume. Do you think a government can pick a winner? Can they create the next unicorn, or is it more about setting up the right environment to create that frictionless experience to allow a founder to act faster and scale at speed?
I think governments cannot pick a winner. I think it's them providing the enabling environment in markets such as our markets, or even in Europe, giving rails for interoperability, encouraging interoperability of platforms, encouraging standardization of APIs into it. And I think to what he mentioned with regards to us as fintechs, and there's a blurring of lines, and I think it's for us to be clear to the regulators on where we're standing. Because am I a payments company today? I lend over $70 million a day. You can buy NVIDIA shares from my platform. You can save on my platform. And you can do so much more on our platform. But we are still a payments company. But if you look at, it's just mentioned, check out the banking license. If you look at Nubank is getting a banking license. If you look at Revolut, they moved from there, they're getting banking licenses, as well as they're getting telco licenses. So is Revolut a telecommunication company? Is it a bank? Is it a payments company? But in the fintech space, we've blurred that out. And in the regulator standpoint, the banking supervision are very clear on disintermediation and on payments. And even areas such as remittances, it has blurred the line in how consumers see it. Is it if I'm paying for Netflix, is it a remittance or is it a payment? Because it's changing currency. So those lines are blurring very, very fast from where we are as digital ecosystems. And for the regulator, it's very confusing. And I think it's up to us to really take the regulators through what levels of integrations are we doing, and are we good at banking? Are we good at this thing? Do we have the right skill sets also in it? So we've taken a different approach. We go with partnership. So if I want a license, I work with a licensed institution like an insurance company or a bank to do the disintermediation on my behalf and enter into commercial agreements with them. But I see where Revolut, new banking going to, and for us is we watch the movie.
Okay, I like it. So partnerships, having people on the ground is absolutely key. Now, both of you have expanded into very different markets. And it's interesting, again, it's something we touched on in the earlier fireside chat. I think governments in many ways are competing for founders around the world today. Some of them are making it harder to stay because of different tax or regulatory rules. A lot of them are moving to Dubai. There's rising cost of living crisis in many parts of the world. I know here in Dubai, you look at some of the work the UAE government is doing, our budget here in Dubai, I think about half of that is going to infrastructure. And it's a very deliberate decision that really signals long-term intent. So from your perspective, when you look at moving into new markets, what are the signals that shows a country is really worth investing in scaling in, and what are those that potentially make you start looking elsewhere?
I think, we talked about nothing is certain, but the more predictability you have, the better it is, or the easier it is to make decisions. Mm-hmm. You can imagine running a company like a big, game theory exercise. If everything was certain, everyone would build companies and everyone would create shareholder value. It would be easy. You'd follow a playbook. So essentially, you have to go and underwrite decisions, and the predictability of a government is definitely one that you actually look into, because it's going to help you make a better decision. You never have perfect information, but it's certainly better to know that you have a stable government, that we have an open dialogue like we had in the UAE since the beginning, that, like you said, they don't pick winners. They just want to create an environment that attracts talent, creates job, creates, they have obviously all the objectives of population, And I think it becomes much easier to create or like to make decisions on this basis. Again, sometimes you're going to have a more favorable regulation. Here in the UAE, for instance, it's possible to get a processing license like we have. It's much harder to get a banking license, for instance. Like, the Revolut founder, which we know really well, is struggling to get that. In the UK, you can get a banking license. Monzo and Revolut had their banking license. And so I think at the end of the day, to your point of wanting to do many things, what most founders have in common is that I think like all exceptional companies have three things in common. Usually they have a core business with a lot of operating leverage that generate a lot of cash. Look at Google, look at Facebook, look at Amazon. There is something that's generating a lot of money. Then they end up becoming very good capital allocators. You take the profits of the first business and create new business lines. And you can subsidize a new business line out of your first business line. You mentioned you allow people to buy NVIDIA stocks, do lending. You certainly didn't start there, but you see this as, you build a business, you have your learnings. And eventually the third thing, you know how to build what I call a human operating system, which is attract talent, retain talent, which is similar to what you're mentioning, almost acting as your own little country. And making sure that your talent, as they get offers from Google, Facebook, and others, stay with you as opposed to want to go for a better salary or a better equity package. And I think about this like very carefully because that's how you build an exceptional company. And then you have to make the right decisions in terms of getting the licenses, because I'm in the group of like, do everything yourselves and not partner. And I think this is a philosophical decision on how you build a business. If you partner, you go much faster because you can be in business almost immediately. I'm building a business to keep. I want to be a shareholder. I never want to sell the business. We will probably list it at some point, but the reality is like, it's just like we enjoy what we're doing, which is I often discuss with my children is an incredible opportunity as a father to enjoy your job and just enjoying being in the office and creating value. But my view is a view of a 2050 view, and I don't want to partner. I'd rather go slower, do things right, and eventually control end to end what I'm doing. And then you choose the countries where where your predictability is high and the goal you're seeking or the license you're seeking is essentially available on the menu. Because you know that some licenses are not available on the menu in certain countries. And when we started this business more than 10 years ago, most countries were not allowing the license that we have today. So being fundamentally positive, I think that the discussion we're having today, many countries are realizing this. They have to be attractive, and they're going to open their financial services sector because it's good for the country. It's good for the end users, the people, the merchants, the consumers who use those services every day.
Okay, so stable policy and regulation, open markets, that frictionless experience, and in your experience, sticking at solo is better. Although I know you spend about 90% of your life traveling around the world. I think you work about 6.5 days per week. So I can tell you, being a billion-dollar founder does not come easy. Sitoyo, let me bring in you here, because again, very different story, but it's fascinating because M-PESA really has become part of the national infrastructure. We're mentioning in Kenya, for example, where wages are sent, welfare payments are made as well. What are the signals that you and the team at M-PESA look for in a country when looking to scale or expand there?
I think it's quite similar. First, especially like in Africa, it's two ways. Is it a bank-led or is it a telco-led model? Is it a free model? West Africa is more bank-led models. The Sub-Saharan is much more, let me say, freer in terms of how the regulations are. And then who's giving the license? Is it the banking supervision side or is it the national payment side? So, but that has evolved very quickly right now. Even in areas such as West Africa, we're seeing regulations change big time to support more freer accessibility to certain licenses in it. So those are a couple of just things that we see. The other thing is areas such as data sovereignty. I think that's a very key factor. That at times puts us as a local, as an African company at a much more disadvantageous position as my friend here. Because for us, we have to have a primary and secondary data centers in country. But when it comes to the big tech, they have no primary or secondary data center operating on cloud. So while it costs me $30-40 million to go into a country, if I was on cloud services, it could cost me $3 to $4 million. So it's a big difference, a disadvantage for local countries, companies within the continent how we operate, because they see it as a systemic risk into it. So I think those kind of things will play a big role. I think in future, especially since the signing of the Genius Act, the biggest issues now on stablecoin and cryptocurrencies and what's going to happen in it, and we're getting a lot of inquiries on what to do. But again, here we work with the UAE. We're looking at what the UAE is doing. I think they're also looking at how to protect the economy. For us in the continent is to ensure that we don't dollarize the market. So no matter how much USDT, USDC they want us to open our platforms, we need to be very careful on how we open up the market. So seeing whether it's going to be a local backed stable coin or a different currency-backed stablecoin in the future is going to be.
Watch this space. We are out of time, so in 30 seconds or less, I'm going to ask each of you, where is the next unicorn coming from? Obviously, you're both in payments, finance. Are we looking or agentic AI? Are we looking fintech? Are we looking biotech, health? Guillaume, where is the next unicorn coming from today that government should be watching for?
I mean, everything is on AI at this point. So I think it's, I was going to ask you in the UAE, I'd have maybe a more precise opinion, but I think like eventually AI is the biggest revolution that the world has known. It's like fire, like, in the beginning, and people can cook meals, and then electricity. And I think, I just had a 6-hour ET meeting this morning. Everyone is in the UAE, as a matter of fact. All my leadership team, and all we talk about is like, how do we transform the business? And we're not going fast enough, and this is like, a pivotal moment for us. And the AI native companies are doing extraordinary things at this point. So I think it's all about AI for me.
Okay, I love it. Sitoyo, final thoughts with you.
I think agentic AI, as well as digital currencies, will play a big role in the future.
Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, let's give our panelists a big round of applause. Thank you so much, Guillaume and Sitoyo. A real pleasure.